When you hear the word perimenopause and menopause, women probably come to mind. But did you know that men can also experience male menopause? That's coming up right now. Hi everyone, I'm Andrea Donsky, co-founder of Morphus, and today I'm here with my really good friend, Bryce Wylde, a functional medicine expert. Welcome to Morphus, Bryce.
Andy, how are you?
I'm great. I'm happy that you're on the show, and we're going to be talking male menopause. So when I first asked you to come on the show, and I'm like, what should we talk about? You're like, let's talk about male menopause. And I got to be honest, I didn't even realize that men can go through menopause as well.
We do. I affectionately refer to this as manopause. So switch out of the E for an A. Although men are still in there, if you call it menopause, technically it's referred to as andropause, and it's been acknowledged perhaps over the last 30 years in clinical sciences. And just like women, this whole process starts in our early 30s, whereas for us, testosterone starts to take a slow and steady decline, actually about 1% per year. Of age, all the way through to our 80s and 90s. The difference between men and women, of course, women will slowly decline with estrogen, then all of a sudden have a real cutoff when their ovaries stop producing estrogen, whereas ours is a slow, steady, decline. Here's some alarming statistics, though, for you. But 40% of us, as of age 30, are already clinically low. So I'll also share with your viewers how to test appropriately, not just skim the surface test for testosterone, but really do the deep dive to know whether or not you're low and should top up on things like herbs and supplements, and of course diet, lifestyle. All that's very important. We'll share all of that information with your viewers. But it's interesting because observational studies have seen consistent results in people who are in particular overweight due to low testosterone, overweight or even obese for that matter. The greater the weight loss, the greater the testosterone increased. And so we'll talk about that as well, hopefully. So, here are the symptoms as it pertains to male-based menopause or menopause or andropause. They're all interchangeable. We've got low energy. And a lot of this sounds similar to those who are of the female variety going through menopause. Low energy, depression, sadness, inability to lose weight, decreased motivation, lowered self-confidence. That's a big one. Difficulty concentrating, lacking motivation, insomnia, sleeplessness, increased body fat. A lot of women that are listening to this are like, yeah, my man's doing that as I did when my estrogen started to decline. And so, one of the strongest observational studies, Andrea, is between obesity, carrying too much fat, the big beer belly, and of course, the man boobs. That all relates to carrying too much estrogen for us guys. And once we lose that weight, that fat tissue comes off, we start to really see a strong increase in testosterone. So we'll get into all of that as well.
So just so I understand clearly, so for women, when we're going into menopause, it's the decrease in estrogen, but for men, it's a decrease in testosterone. So for men,
got it.
Okay, so for men, you're saying is if they're obese and they actually lose the weight. Now, for women, it's mostly like, obviously perimenopause is 35 plus, but when you're around the age of 50, 51 and a half, we know the average age of women in menopause. To increase that estrogen, I would think that just losing weight isn't going to increase the estrogen, but that isn't the case when it comes to male menopause. I just want to understand exactly kind of like how.
Well, it's a great point that you bring up. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Maybe we'll do the deep dive in genetics. Everyone's different. So you can have a man who has a slight propensity to be estrogen dominant. And we'll talk about those characteristics. They are kind of like me, full head of hair into my late 40s. I retain, have a more difficult time retaining muscle mass. Got to work my butt off in the gym to do that. Whereas you have a male who's otherwise bald and ripped, and he only has to go to the gym a couple of times a week. That's testosterone dominant. And we'll get into the intricacies of that. But at the end of the day, that guy is going to have an easier time through andropause or menopause than I will, because I've already shown, and I've done my DNA to know this, I've already shown that I can be a little more estrogen dominant as a guy. And so as I lose or taper off my testosterone, estrogen will be that much more dominant in me. Now, it's the opposite for women. Women lose their estrogen quite quickly, and that's the true menopause. And there is the perimenopause, so it does dwindle down. But as of about the age 45 to 50, early 50s, depending on the female, you can have an estrogen dominant female. Or you can have a testosterone dominant female. And the way they present differently, similar to the physiology that testosterone dominant female, she'll have, lots of muscle striations, very little deposits of fat, very little, cellulite, if you look closely at the skin. And she'll have an easy time losing weight. Whereas the estrogen dominant female, she has a lot harder time through menopause, because that crash is even more accentuated. And so in order to compensate for that, estrogen then is produced in the fat tissue, as well as the breasts and some other tissues such as the uterus and fallopian tubes in the female body. So, what your body does quite intuitively, biochemistry is quick to enact the fat tissue storage mechanism. Because of that sharp decline in estrogen, especially for the estrogen dominant woman, she is going to purposely put on fat tissue to compensate for that significant decline. Similar things are happening for the male, but the opposite way.
For women who are watching right now and like, oh my gosh, my husband or my partner or my brother, father, uncle might be going through this, what are some things that they can look out for to make them watch this video? Because I think that's the key, is for men to understand their bodies and what they could possibly be going through at a certain age. Like you said, it can start in their 30s and upwards.
Absolutely. So again, let's run through the list. What we see are very similar symptoms, but again, for us, it's due to a decline, slow and steady over time, of testosterone. So we're talking about mental, emotional symptoms, low energy. We're talking about depression, sadness, lack of motivation, lack of concentration or focus, troubles with sleep, reduced muscle mass. That is a huge one. It's hard to put on muscle if testosterone is not high enough, in both men and women, by the way. The man boobs, that's a big visual cue, and the beer belly, frankly. Maybe we'll get into the microbiome, the gut, when that's not supported. There's too much yeast overgrowth and or not enough good bacteria there. You have a hard time remaining hormonally balanced, whether you're female or male. Erectile dysfunction, we didn't talk about that. That's a huge one. Loss of libido and erectile dysfunction, that's an obvious blatant sign. That, sleeplessness and depression is key for us as clinicians to signal that, yeah, of course, this man is going through likely menopause. And again, the stats are clear. 10% are truly deficient in testosterone and have actual clinical symptoms for low testosterone, leading to true andropause. And another 40% of us guys, starting age 30, have subclinical, that is to say, not overt symptoms, but we're running low on testosterone. Stress is a big contributor. It's #1 North American-wide silent killer, and it's because of low adrenal function. And in guys, low adrenal function, you're not pumping out that precursor to testosterone called DHEA. It's a precursor to all hormones. Because the adrenals are fatigued or overly stressed, what are you doing? Your cortisol is high, you're putting on weight, and you're dipping into your testosterone reserve. So that's obviously no good. So coming full circle, really, to your question, what do you do? #1 is get tested, right? So at the very top, I said we'll talk about that. Maybe now's the right time. Getting tested to confirm whether or not you actually have low testosterone is so important, and not just looking at testosterone, because your doctor might confirm, yeah, no problem, we can run this test, and they'll do blood tests and say, yeah, looks like everything's fine. Testosterone comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. So tightly bound testosterone to a protein hormone called sex hormone binding globulin, your body can't access that. So you can test for these things. You can test for testosterone, and you can test for sex hormone binding globulin to know how much is bound and unusable. Then you can test for loosely bound testosterone, regular testosterone. It's a little easier to use, but it's still hard to use. The real biomarker, the giveaway based on normal values, is free testosterone, free or bioavailable testosterone. That's what our bodies can actually use. If that's low, that's a dead giveaway. So again, sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG, bioavailable or free testosterone. And then the third one you want to look at on your blood or serum is DHT, dihydrotestosterone. So that's kind of like the strongest form of testosterone. And that's, by the way, where those testosterone dominant males are going to lose their hair. The advantage is, of course, they gain muscle mass very easily, but they often experience male pattern baldness at a very early age. And you and I both know of a trick that works, supplemental trick. We'll get into that in a sec. But DHT has a negative consequence, and that is, it might sound great, like, yeah, muscle mass and all that wonderful stuff, but that predisposes us guys to prostate cancer and even benign prostate hypertrophy, and therefore urinary tract issues and all kinds of things. So getting tested is key. Here's another thing: vitamin D, zinc, magnesium. These are trace minerals elements. Vitamin D is an incredibly important hormonal precursor to testosterone. You can check for these on blood as well. 25-OHD, vitamin D, that's key.
Yeah,
zinc and copper ratios, and even red blood cell level magnesium. Those three are really, really important to look at. And then Andy, one more thing: bioimpedance analysis. Not stepping on the scale, not a Tanita, not a caliper pinch, but bioimpedance analysis. You get that done. It's a harmless electrode that feeds information through your body, and it picks up on how much fat tissue you have. There are optimal ratios, as guys, depending on your age. And of course, that muscle mass, you want optimal muscle mass and you want optimal fat tissue, minimal fat tissue. Otherwise, you're simply feeding estrogen into your system and your testosterone's already starting to tank, and that's a double whammy.
Okay, so many questions going through my mind. Number one, so when you're going to the doctor, I just want to summarize for a second. So you go to the doctor, men, you're going to the doctor, you want to ask your doctor for 3 different types, because you mentioned there's probably 5 different types of testosterone, but you want to ask them for 3 main ones, the free testosterone and the 2 others that you mentioned. These are blood tests that you can ask them for, or is it better to get a urine test or a saliva test for it?
If we start getting really technical in my own clinical practice, I will always do both blood and urine and even genetics. So blood tells us kind of what's floating around. And what floats around is a very difficult to uncouple form of testosterone that's bound to SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. Then you have your regular testosterone, all of which is testable from a simple blood work that your doctor can do, very widely available, and then free or bioavailable testosterone. So those are the 3 primary types. If you just get that done, that's pretty decent. You can get a ratio or variability as to what available amounts of testosterone you might be featuring as a guy. It's a dead giveaway when free testosterone is low, and then you might be a candidate if you're experiencing the symptoms we're talking about for menopause in men or andropause. If it's really low, you might be a candidate for testosterone replacement therapy, TRT, like HRT, hormone replacement therapy.
Oh, really?
That's really up to your doctor. But in my clinical practice in functional medicine, we'll also look at urine, because looking at blood just shows us what's moving around in the blood. Looking at urine as well is studying the end metabolites. What has your body done to use these hormones, manufacture them, and then spit them out essentially in urine? And when we get these ratios, we get a really good understanding, a snapshot of what's happening right now. I mentioned genes because genes give me the full picture as to whether or not lifelong you are that proverbial estrogen dominant person or testosterone dominant person. Because no matter whether you're male or female, we all make hormones exactly the same way. Believe it or not, I express differently than you because I'm hormonally testosterone dominant as a male. You're estrogen dominant as a female. Your X chromosomes dictate the fact that you have ovaries. Our gonads are different. Male, I'm an XY. My Y dictates my maleness.
Right.
But the way we make hormones is exactly the same cascade. It starts off as something called DHEA. It's also testable. That has a lot of relationship to the adrenal glands, the glands in charge of stress that sit on your kidneys. So DHEA into progesterone, and then progesterone turns into testosterone. And then testosterone turns into estrogen. That whole cascade, male or female, we do it the same way. Some of us do it faster than others. I make more overall testosterone. You make more overall estrogen. But studying the genes and the interplay of each step along that pathway and how fast or slow those steps are, we can intervene using nutrition, lifestyle, and supplements to really personalize. So we could ultimately end up doing the real deep dive, but anyone listening today know that the best way to have your doctor check, if it's just simply through a universal health care plan or a HMO, or it's a statewide and a province-wide jurisdiction when it comes to testing and fees. But just doing the free testosterone, and then SHBG will still give you a really good degree of understanding.
And I'm going to put a link to if you want to get your DNA tested, we'll put a link below for you to get it tested. I highly recommend it. And I think, Bryce, I know that, from the there are companies out there who do it. I have a link to the DNA company, and I do think that's crucial. I've done my testing, and also it's important also to understand how you digest starch and how you detox your body. I mean, there's so many other things that are important for it, which we can save for another video, because I do think it's an important one to talk about. Okay, so you mentioned something before about the connection between testosterone and prostate cancer, I believe. What was that connection, and how can men prevent, like, so should all men be on certain supplements in order to prevent that, something like that happening? Explain what that connection is.
Yeah, so it's a deep genetic connection, first and foremost. Often doctors are looking at PSA, right? That's a test that, depending on your age as a man and your ethnicity, frankly, there's higher risk in African-American men, lower in white men. But depending on all that, your doctor will start to look at PSA, or prostate-specific antigen, right? That's an immune system response to a prostate that's growing in size. And that could signal anything from benign prostate hypertrophy, or the enlargement of the prostate gland, very common in men, or even prostate cancer. So along with something called the DRE, or the digital rectal exam, also something we don't look forward to on an annual, but to do that and get a feel of the size, as well as to look on blood, gives a good sense of the health of your prostate. However, looking at your DNA can shed a lot more light even earlier on. So remember, we talked about this cascade, kind of the waterfall of flow. We all, male or female, make testosterone from progesterone. So if I find that that's controlled by a gene, and you don't have to remember any of this, but called CYP17A1. So progesterone into testosterone. So if that gene is slow as a guy, and I want to maybe speed it up, providing downstream there's no danger, I'll explain. But I might use something called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. Great studies have shown that you can speed that up. However, I mentioned downstream. If downstream I'm making too much DHT really quickly, and again, phenotypically, or the way I look, I might be bald already, and I might be jacked by going to the gym only twice a week, but my prostate's at greater risk. Why? Because DHT is known to stimulate growth of the prostate gland as well. So if you're not clearing, and you mentioned detoxification, so we're not just talking about ethereal toxins and chemicals in the environment, we're talking about the end metabolites of your own hormones can be toxic. So if you're not clearing DHT effectively, you may want to use quercetin, for example, or EGCG from green tea to help you detox or clear that DHT. But if you're slow all the way along and you want to make more testosterone, you might be talking about using things like fenugreek or polyphenols, because in a guy that will help to block something called aromatase, or estrogens, and help ramp up testosterone, right? So it's all kinds of different ways in which we assess, but DNA tells us a lot. And full circle, to really be clear about the answer to your question, understanding from a genetic perspective how you clear your testosterone as a guy predicts very heavily as to whether or not you'll have a problem, a benign problem, or even cancer with your testosterone later on in life.
Are there any supplements or lifestyle choices that you would recommend to all men that they should be doing, regardless of what their DNA or their genetics are?
Stress causes the adrenal glands to fatigue, and ultimately DHEA production, which is the precursor upstream to testosterone, declines. So stress equals low testosterone. So learning lifestyle approaches to lowering stress, managing your stress is key. Getting a better sleep, deeper sleep, making sure that you are exercising and burning off that cortisol first thing in the morning, making sure you're learning to properly meditate or be mindful. All these things that can lower stress that have been clinically studied and evaluated as effective is almost number one. We've also seen, of course, keeping weight down. That's right up there. Lifestyle, diet. In the words of Michael Pollan, one of my favorite authors and New York Times bestseller, multiple books, The Omnivore Dilemma, his slogan anyway, eat food, and what he means by that is local, organic, not too much, mainly plants. That's his slogan. It's a 3-part slogan. I could never have said it more simply, so as an homage to him, that's what I'd highly recommend. Supplementally, this is my area of expertise, of course, ingredients. I love ashwagandha and rhodiola. Love those two. They're stress busters, but ashwagandha in some clinical studies have also shown to nicely boost testosterone. muscle enhancement, who want, again, do much more weight-bearing activities. Tribulus, which is an herb, can help with that. Horny goatweed. I actually named one of my companies after that, Horny Goatweed Inc. It's actually a thorny bush that have been empirically observed that that goats will munch on. But for whatever reasons they do that, if we take this, there's been some decent studies to show not just an increase in testosterone, but perhaps even a lowering of that sex hormone binding globulin that holds on to testosterone and won't let it go to be usable. Intermittent fasting, huge. Intermittent fasting, so that is to recreate your feeding window to about an 8-hour window, no more. So for, let's say, between 10 and 6, and the rest of the time you're fasting. That'll manage insulin. You'll drop, fat tissue. You'll probably get better sleeps at night from that as well. That is shown to, pretty significantly increase testosterone. But once again, by increasing your lean muscle and decreasing your fat tissue, and then of course limiting alcohol. Alcohol in any shape or form, whether it's red wine or beer or spirits, liquor, too much of that is going to contribute to estrogen. Most people don't realize this, but these are estrogen mimickers, and beer, especially hot beer. That's what we call the beer belly for a reason, because there's so many empty calories in beer. But also that fat tissue, let's not remember, around your hip for a guy is going to contribute to estrogen. So those are just some. There's many others, but those are some that are probably top line for me as I'd recommend to my patients in a clinical setting.
You mentioned exercise in the morning to burn off cortisol. That's interesting. So you're saying that's the best way to manage stress, I guess, or one of the side effects of cortisol?
So cortisol is naturally higher as soon as we open our eyes and light hits our retina, and we start to produce serotonin, the day cycle hormone. It's a feel-good, mood-related hormone, and we start to cancel off melatonin. But cortisol is a stress hormone, but it's naturally supposed to be elevated in the morning, and then it's supposed to come down toward and start to taper off around 4 or 5 p.m. and then really take a slump so as to relax us and naturally allow melatonin to take over from serotonin to keep us into deep sleep. By the way, sleep is not just the hours of time you clock on your pillow. The depth of sleep, that's going to contribute to increasing testosterone as well. Quality of sleep, sleep hygiene, that's keeping a cool room comfortable, making sure you're not waking up from the slightest noise, and using a noise canceling device. But sleep is key. When it's funny because what I see in a clinical practice is often the reverse. People waking up with low cortisol and then ramping up toward the afternoon and end of the day. That's where I love to use these, what we call adaptogens, which are herbs, botanicals, often Ayurvedic medicine, Indian, ancient traditional medicine from India. But ashwagandha is one of my favorites because studies show that it can nicely increase testosterone as well. So cortisol, you want to burn that off first thing in the morning. When it's high, exercise helps to bring it down. And by the way, getting exercise in too late in the evening can rev up your engines, make your body too hot, and then interrupt your sleep, which is not a good thing.
We just did an interview with somebody on adaptogens, and I'm going to put it up in the link in the card above. So if you want to watch it, I highly recommend it. And I'm also a huge fan of adaptogens. You mentioned ashwagandha, and I'm going to switch just for females for 1 second. If it increases testosterone, is it safe for females to take in perimenopause and menopause, or is it something that we should avoid?
Right, great question. And so once again, I'm going to throw it back to personalization. So I don't give it to every female. If I see that they're already slightly testosterone dominant, I may not. But that's not the case in most women. Most women, especially as they're experiencing menopause, they're tanking for estrogen and testosterone. So often we're using a combination of things that will help boost, or let's call it balance, estrogen, and there's no harm in a potential slight boost in testosterone. Let's keep in mind what happens to testosterone in the female body. In the female body, and the male body, but in anybody, testosterone turns into estrogen. Yeah. So if we can boost estrogen or testosterone a little bit in the female body who is in menopause, what we're doing actually is just downstream creating a little bit more of the estrogen that they're missing.
Which is a good thing, right? Exactly. Interesting. So I want to go to mood swings a little bit, because one of the things as females tend to have some side effects or signs and symptoms, we'll call them, of menopause is the whole mood thing. Does that affect men as well? Like you think about midlife crisis. Does that kind of play into the whole mood thing for men who are in andropause or menopause, like you said?
Absolutely. You've heard of the classic age-old story of the man who's in his early 50s and he's experiencing sleeplessness, a little bit of depression and low mood. And what does he do? He goes out and he buys a red Ferrari, right? If you can afford it, right? And that's the midlife crisis. Actually, that experience of looking forward to something, planning and executing will boost not only dopamine, the reward neurochemical, but also testosterone. It's unbelievable how much the brain and even perception has to do with the periphery and how many, and how much, the endocrine system is going to engage. That's the system that makes hormones. We call this PNEI, or psychoneuroendocrine immune. And the PNE, part of that PNEI acronym, is psychology, neuro, which is brain, and then endocrine, which is hormones. There's an interplay, a whole highway between all these things. So you have this slight, steady decline in testosterone for a guy, and come 50. Let's do the quick math from what we said earlier. At least 1% reduction per year, starting at age 30. So you're already 20% decline, reduced in the amount of testosterone you're producing. That's big. That's huge for a guy, and getting a feel-good mechanism in play is going to give that testosterone a slight boost. So there's that. And the big thing to keep in mind as a difference for women is that there's this slow and steady decline. You referred to it as there's actually pre-peri, and then pre-menopause, then menopause, and then post-menopause. There's sort of 5 classic or technical stages. But when you're in pre and perimenopause, just before menopause, you're kind of like a guy in slow, steady decline. But once you hit classic or technical menopause, it's a huge slump. So now your brain is not telling your ovaries to make estrogen. It's not making a follicle or releasing an egg every month. And so 12 months without a period, you're technically in menopause. That's a fast, hard decline. I mentioned that over 30 to 50 for a guy, 20% reduction. Right at that moment in time, almost that year that a female experiences it, they decline in up to 70% of their overall estrogen production. So that experience is drastic. That's why she, the female, will get extreme mood differences in many, not all, hot flashes. So this is a vasodilatory issue related to menopause, extreme and rapid weight gain. So it's slow and steady for guys. We've got the advantage as it relates to the slow and steady aspect.
And you talked about PNEI in our other video, which I'm going to link to above in the card above. We did an interview with Bryce a little bit ago, and we talked about brain health, and you did mention PNEI. So if you do want to watch it, I highly recommend it. It is such a good interview. So please hit the card above and the link above, and you will be able to watch it there. Bryce, so it's interesting that you said that about the mood and how it plays out in men, because I do think it's something that, and I would love to do a whole other video with you on a male perspective, kind of how to support women in menopause and perimenopause. So that's not for today's interview, but I'm going to put that in my notes because I do think it's an interesting one. So we'll have all you men watch that video so you can understand what we're going through. But now we're talking about men and we're talking about andropause. Is there anything else that you feel would be important for the men and the women who are watching this on behalf of a male that we didn't talk about today that you think like, yes, let's talk about this, which will help them understand certain things about their body?
Look, I know we've thrown so much out there. It's difficult to keep up with all of it. A lot of it's medical and technical terms. But I'll tell you, getting tested to understand you personally is probably what I would say is really important. So first, okay, do I have andropause? You want to ask yourself that question. Do I have male menopause? The answer is an irrefutable yes if you're 40, 50, 60 years old as a man. We all do. So that's it. Do you have it? Yes, you have it. But it's a natural, it's a rite of passage, just as it would be for a female. How intensely you have it, you should consider some of the clinical signs and symptoms. So if mood discrepancy, low energy, if there's depression, sleeplessness, loss of libido, loss of an ability to have an erection, these are classic keynote symptoms you want to go to your doctor for, because 10% have these classic symptoms. And they may require actual testosterone replacement therapy. These supplements we've been throwing out and lifestyle efforts probably won't cut it. And a lot of this has to do with genetics. So I'd say get tested. And also don't forget about the non-hormone tests that are so important as precursors to making or helping your body make more testosterone. So just as a recap, red blood cell level of magnesium, not just serum or floating magnesium, RBC magnesium. You'll have to, in most jurisdictions in North America, pay for that one. It's well worth it because then you know whether you should supplement with magnesium. Zinc. And your zinc to copper ratio, easy test to run. Again, it's your blood. And if you're low, zinc is so huge, not only for, hormone production, testosterone support, but also the health of your prostate. And by the way, a handful of pumpkin seeds once a night, might do the trick as it relates to zinc. But if you're really deficient, you want to supplement. And then especially north of 40 degrees latitude, in North America, you need to be supplementing with vitamin D. But how much? And again, it's a very important precursor to testosterone. How much is dependent on your 25-OHD serum blood test. Once you know that, you work with your doctor to get up to optimal levels. This is typically 2,000 to 4,000 international units every day with a fatty meal or some kind of an oil, like an olive oil-based salad dressing or your fish oils that you might be supplementing with every day, which is great for all aspects of health. So there you have it. I mean, we will all develop andropause. We will all have menopause, but to what degree is really only revealed by clinical symptoms and or the feelings that one has subjectively in testing.
So Bryce, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you'd like to share before we end our interview?
So, we talked about a whole bunch of stuff, but again, I'll just reiterate the importance of testing yourself and looking at your DNA. I'm a co-founder of a company that you mentioned earlier on. You actually did your DNA testing through thednacompany.com, the DNA Company. And we look at how your hormones operate based on your genetics. And then we can look at customizing a formula for you based on your DNA. The urinary testing is really important as well. The one we use at P3 Health is called Dutch. It's a dried urine test. And this is a product of Precision Analytical. So you can just actually, their website, I believe, is dutchtest.com. And that's a wonderful one to look at a snapshot of this moment in time, what your body is manufacturing, and then, of course, how you're metabolizing it. You know what we did, Andy, earlier on? We talked about how one of the symptoms of menopause could be, hair loss, and that you and I both have this shared, secret. It's not. It shouldn't be a secret. So there. Out of Malaysian palm oil, and these are clinically verified studies, Malaysian palm oil, there's an extract from this red palm oil called tocotrienols. That's the active ingredient in this product, which is available on Amazon and many health food stores and even over-the-counter drugs.
I'm a big fan.
It works. It works. There's human clinical trials to prove significant between 30 and 50% hair regrowth using this it's a derivative of vitamin E. Tocotrienol is very important for your heart health, for your immune system, for your brain health, but it also ends up being that this ingredient helps you to regrow your
Well, I know there's a mutual friend Bryce and I have, and we'll put a bunch of links to different brands of the tocotrienols below because I'm also a huge fan. Anything that's coming out of Malaysia when it comes to palm fruit it's all sustainably grown, and harvested. But what's amazing is our mutual friend was saying that he technically should be bald, but he's been taking it for 20 years and he has this beautiful full head of hair. So that alone was incredible, as a testimonial for palm fruit oil. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I mean, again, actually people can go to tocotrienol tocotrienols.org, and it's a non-branded website on everything tocotrienols, and look at the hair regrowth studies that have been done there.
Yeah.
I mean, the brain studies are, much more formidable, and the cardiovascular research is, of course, the number one research. But yeah, it just turns out this was a side benefit that was then documented in human clinical trials.
Now, was there a certain amount and again, is it men and women that could take this, or is it?
Yeah, men and women can both take this for male pattern baldness. So I'm just trying to remember, I think it's 100 milligrams twice a day. This has some other things in it, which are probably also helping. But let me just remind myself of the exact amount that's in here. Yeah, so it's 50 milligrams, so twice a day, so 100 milligrams a day.
Thank you so much, Bryce. Where can people find you?
Thank you. Social media is at Wylde on Health. Website is wyldeonhealth.com, where there's over 500,000 pages of free information. And I love to answer questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching today. If you have a male in your life that you would like to share this with, please do, because the more you share shows you care. And if you got value out of today's video, please give us a big thumbs up and leave a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts on what we talked about today. And hit that notification bell so that you are notified every single time we have a new Morphus video. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.